If you're a solo content creator like I am, and you do a lot of your work out on location, you'll know how important good B-roll is to enhance the quality of your video. And if you happen to use a mobile phone to get that B-roll, you'll also know how important it is to get good, stable footage. And the answer for that is to get yourself a mobile phone gimbal. Now, there are loads of companies out there on the market who sell them, DJI, Fiotech, Giant for instance. But today, I'm going to review one from a new company on the block called Aochuan. And the model I'm looking at is the Aochuan Smart X. Okay, so let's actually talk about the Smart X, shall we? Now for me, this is a bit of a gimbal of two halves. You've got this part, which is the actual hardware, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you've also got the software, which Aochuan have developed, and that shouldn't be underestimated when you're considering purchasing this, but we'll talk about that a bit later. When we talk about the hardware, well, it's reasonably sturdy. It feels plasticky, but decent quality plastic. It comes with this tripod mount, which you can attach to the bottom, or interestingly enough, you could attach it to the side or something similar to the side. And if you wanted to have more sturdy footage, you could use that to hold on to. Now in the Smart X Pro, this isn't available because this is actually a focus wheel, but we don't get that on the Smart X. We only get the screw attachment. Now, as you'll see, with it folded down, it's quite compact, and I would suggest you could probably fit that into the pocket of a pair of loose fitting trousers. So it's got quite a small form factor, and it's surprisingly easy really to set up. You just literally clip this up and you're good to go. So, and there's a nice little housing in here for when you pack it back down again, which we'll just do. You can just drop that into the housing and it's quite secure, it isn't going anywhere, which is a good little feature actually, I have to say. Another really good feature on this as well is the fact that it comes with a battery that you can take out, so a removable battery, which you don't see in gimbals very much. So this makes it kind of future-proof, because obviously if you've got a built-in internal battery that you can't remove, when that battery finally loses its charge, then the gimbal is no good anymore, so you have to throw it away. So the fact that this comes with a battery that you can replace is pretty good, and obviously it's rechargeable through the gimbal via a USB-C port, which is here, and this is magnetic as well, which is handy. So when it comes to attaching the phone, the Smart X is quite good actually. In my experience, it's normally been quite tricky to get the phones into these grips, but this one is a lot easier than some of the others. So basically it just slides in very nicely and there's not much of an issue at all. And if you can see down the side there, you've got a little bit of a recess in the grip itself, which means that your gimbal, or the gimbal itself, isn't going to be pressing any of the buttons if you don't want it to. So that's another really good feature, I think, of this particular gimbal. Now there are four main functions on this gimbal that can be accessed by depressing the joystick. The first one is PF, which is pan follow, and essentially that's for your panning shots. So wherever you turn the gimbal, it will follow you, but it will not move in any of the other axes, which is, like I said, useful for panning shots. The second one is the follow function, which will follow you obviously in the vertical and horizontal axis. So that's good for revealing shots, or if you just want to look up whilst you're also panning. The third mode is L mode, or lock mode, and basically what that does is what it says on the tin. It completely locks the phone in the direction it's facing, so no matter where you turn the gimbal, it's locked on all axes. And this is useful for things like rail shots, so if you're trying to reveal something from behind a tree for instance, or if you want to follow somebody and you don't want any movement at all, so you don't want that panning, you would use the lock mode. And the final mode is the POV mode, which is the point of view mode, and essentially what that does is that moves on all of the three axes, so that's horizontal, vertical and in tilt. And you can get some really interesting and creative looks with this. Not something that I use very often, to be honest with you, but it's there if you need it. So unfortunately for me, there's one slight design flaw in this gimbal which stops me doing a move which I use a lot in my content, and that is the vertical reveal. And the reason for that is that this column here is impinging on the camera itself. So basically what I would do is have this in lock mode, and I'd have the gimbal pointed down, but the camera would still be vertical here, and I would be able to move it up past the foreground subject to reveal what's in the background. And obviously with this, because this gets in the way, it's virtually, well, it's absolutely impossible to do, which is unfortunate. So essentially that's my review of the gimbal, but as I said at the beginning, this really is a bit of a gimbal of two halves. So let's now take a look at the software app that Aochuan have developed and see how that works. Okay, so let's try the face tracking on this and see how good it is. I'm just going to switch it on now. So select face tracking here. Okay, and as you can see, that's now tracking me, so let's see how it's working. It's pretty good, seems pretty good. It's keeping me in the center of the screen, I notice, which might be an issue if you're trying to compose yourself so that you're off to a side, but it does track rather well, so you can't really argue with that at all, can you? So yeah, so I'm quite impressed with the face tracking on this. Okay, so let's have a look at the app here for Aochuan and see what they're using. Now, I'm only really going to talk about the things that I'm going to find interesting. So live broadcast, I'm not going to touch on. You've got the long exposure function, which obviously is going to take several images and blend them together to create a long exposure. You've got this thing here called trajectory delay, which is interesting. Now, actually, that's just a moving time lapse in all essence. And what you would do with this is you would move your, so let's do it, shall we? I'm going to move my gimbal to the first starting point and click on the tap on the button, and then I'm going to move it across to the second point, and I'm going to tap on the add on the screen. So let's move it there. Okay, and then let's hit next step. Now I only want a short one, so let's just click start and we'll see what that does. So it's going to move the gimbal over, and then it's going to start taking a time lapse. Now it's not going to show anything at all here basically because nothing's moving, but if something was moving, obviously you would have that in the time lapse, and you've got all of the settings that you can use to achieve that time lapse. So I dare say you could get some really fantastic moving time lapses using that method. And you've got a standard time lapse, which is the next one, and you've got all your options here, how long between shutter intervals, how long the shooting time you want it to be, and then it tells you how many seconds of a video you're going to create from that. There's slow motion, which I kind of wouldn't use. I think personally I would change the options within the actual manual settings, which I'll show you in a bit, and then slow it down in post. So obviously again, you've got your standard video, you've got a photo option, you've got a panorama, which obviously on the side here you've got your options of exactly what panel you want to take. Got Hitchcock, which is a dolly zoom, and that takes some practice. I haven't actually used that, so I probably will practice with that at some point. And then you've got Inception mode, which is quite interesting, as it will, if I press start, it should, if I press record, there we go. As you can see, it's turning the camera around to give you that Inception sort of shot in post. So that'd be quite cool for some interesting features, perhaps. Not something I think I would use in my own videography, but still something that might be useful. And then if we come over to the left hand side, now this is where it starts to get quite interesting, is we've got the modes here. So if I go back onto my video mode, as you can see, I've got options here. So I can choose here my resolution, so I can shoot 4K, I can shoot basically whatever the phone is capable of. That is what it will give you here. And you've also got your two codecs, H.264 and H.265 to pick from. And if you click these little boxes down here, you've got lots of options here. It starts to open up a lot of things. So here's your timer for your photos. Here's your flash, so you can put your flashlight on from in here on your camera. You can turn your flash on if you're taking a photo. You can go into your camera settings, which will give you a few bits and pieces there. you can go into gimbal settings. Now the one thing that I've adjusted on this gimbal are the speeds at which the joystick works. So in the parameter settings here, I've moved the joystick speed down to 3 degrees per second, and that was up at something like 10 when you first get it, and for me that's moving everything way too quickly, so you might want to have a little fiddle about with those. You've also got a grid that you can turn on for your rule of thirds. Now you've got anti-shake. Now I'm not sure what use anti-shake would be with an iPhone, because you've got built-in image stabilization on the iPhone anyway, but where things start to get interesting is where you go to expert mode. Now in expert mode you can change everything on the video settings, so you can change the shutter speed, you can change the ISO, obviously you can't change the aperture, but you can change things so you can actually start filming it in a much more professional way. And if you link that in with filming at 24 frames per second for instance, then you want your shutter speed because of the 180 rule at 1/50th of a second or somewhere around that, and that actually works really well. So having that ability is really good. The one thing that I will say that I do miss on this, and I would hope that Aochuan would add in a future update, would be to actually put in a log profile or a flat profile, so you can grade your images or you can grade your footage afterwards, because currently it only shoots in the standard profile. You can also change the lenses here, so if you've got more lenses like I have on the iPhone, you can go into telephoto, you can go into your rear lens, or you can go into your wide angle lens. So it's a really quite comprehensive and very functional piece of software. So there you have it, the Aochuan Smart X, a really nice budget gimbal. Decent hardware, backed up by decent software. It does have a couple of flaws, like I said. The design flaw for the horizontal reveal I really wish could be fixed, and hopefully Aochuan might be able to do something about adding a flat profile in their app. But other than that, for the money, I definitely think it's worthwhile taking a look at. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.